Welcome to the Manufacturing Money Room with host Tolani Lawson. Tolani is an experienced CFO who works with manufacturing businesses to bring clarity to their numbers, especially when cash feels tight and decisions feel heavy. These are the conversations that usually stay behind closed doors. Until now, it's time to step into the Manufacturing Money Room.
Now, let's look at why systems and processes become your competitive advantage. One of the biggest myths in manufacturing is that growth problems are people problems. The owner says, I need better employees, or the operation leader says, I need more supervisors, or I need more experienced operators. And while those things may help, they are rarely the root cause. They're rarely the root issue. Because what I've learned over the years is that most growing manufacturing businesses, they don't struggle for the lack of good people. They struggle because they become dependent on good people. There's a difference. Let me explain this. Early in a company's life, the business runs on relationships, on hustle, memory, and experience. So the owner knows every customer, the scheduler knows every hot job, and the account manager knows which customers pay slowly, right? The production manager knows which machine is likely to become a bottleneck. And the business works because everyone carries a piece of it in their heads. And for a while, that's enough. In fact, it can be a huge advantage. The company is agile and communication is fast, so decisions happen quickly. But then something changes. The business grows, and now you have more customers, you have more jobs, and you have more employees. So there is a bigger level of complexity. And suddenly, those informal systems that got the company here to begin with start to break. And that's not because the people stopped performing, it's because the business has become too large to run on memory. That's the moment many manufacturers reach where the company starts feeling harder to manage, harder to coordinate, and harder to predict. And what many leaders don't realize is they're no longer experiencing a people problem. They're experiencing a systems problem. Today, we're going to talk about why systems and processes become one of the biggest competitive advantages in manufacturing. And not because they make you more bureaucratic, but because they make your business more consistent. We've talked about consistency over the last several episodes, and consistency is what allows companies to scale. So let's look at the difference between people and systems. Let me ask you a simple question. If your best production manager took a month off tomorrow, what would happen? If your scheduler left unexpectedly, how will that impact your business? And if your accounting manager retired, what would happen to the business? For many businesses, the honest answer is that we'd be in trouble. And that's not because those people aren't valuable. They are very valuable. It's just because knowledge has become concentrated in individuals instead of being embedded in processes. So I once worked with this manufacturing company that had an outstanding plant manager. Everybody trusted him and everyone depended on him. He knew every customer, every machine, every scheduling nuance, and every production challenge. He was exceptional. Then he went on vacation, and within days, leadership started noticing something. Nobody was quite sure how certain decisions were made because there was no decision metric. There was no metrics in the business to help with decision making. The business didn't actually have a scheduling process, it had a person. And that's an important distinction. Strong businesses don't eliminate the need for talented people. They create systems that allow talented people to perform consistently. Because eventually, every growing manufacturer reaches a point where people alone can no longer carry the complexity. Now we're going to talk about the different areas of a system. I'm going to pick the first one, which is visibility. The first system that every growing manufacturer needs is visibility because you cannot manage what you cannot see. Now, when I say visibility, I don't mean complicated dashboards. I don't mean 20-page reports. I mean knowing the handful of things that determine whether your business is healthy. Can leadership see the business operations clearly? Now, what are these items I'm talking about? Open orders, knowing exactly how much you have pending in orders, what has been won, that's your open orders, the actual orders that have been won throughout the rest of this year. Your production status, knowing where production stands for those open orders. Inventory levels, knowing how much inventory you have in stock. And shipment, knowing how much you're shipping out every week. And then, quite important, your cash position, understanding how much cash is left to run your business and how long it is going to take for you to run out of cash. Many manufacturing businesses don't have an execution problem, they have a visibility problem. Because by the time leadership learns about an issue, the shipment is already late, or the inventory is already excessive, or the customer is already frustrated. So, what we want to do is build systems that surface problems earlier. Because the sooner you see a problem, the more options you have. And the more options you have, the less expensive the solution becomes. One of the simplest exercises I recommend is asking if something went wrong in this area today, how quickly would we know? If the answer is a week later or month end, you probably have a visibility gap. And visibility gaps become expensive. So that's one area where you definitely want to close the gap and start building some visibility around your business. Now, let's look at number two, ownership. The second system is ownership. And this sounds simple, but it's one of the biggest causes of operational chaos. Let me give you an example. If a shipment is delayed, who owns communicating with the customer? If a material shortage appears, who owns resolving it? Inventory accuracy, if that declines, who owns fixing it? If multiple people believe someone else owns the outcome, the issue lingers. One thing I've learned is that organizations don't need more discussions, they need clearer ownership. And what you want to do as a strong manufacturer is know exactly who owns these areas of your business. You want to make sure that someone is responsible for scheduling, inventory, purchasing, customer communication, collections, and production performance. And not departments, but actual people. You want to make sure that those responsibilities and ownership lines become clear and accountability becomes possible. Because when you have people who are accountable, you start to create a level of consistency. Now, let's talk about the third item, standard of work. This is where some leaders get uncomfortable because process often gets confused with bureaucracy. And that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about making your business more complex. The purpose of a process is not control, the purpose of a process is consistency. So imagine two employees handling the same task completely differently. They have different outcomes, different timing, different quality, different customer experience, really. And that variability creates friction. That creates some complexity creep in your business. So, strong manufacturers reduce variability where it matters the most. They create standard approaches for quoting, purchasing, receiving inventory, customer onboarding, invoicing, collections, these specific areas of the business. And these are not rigid rules that you're setting in place. What you want is to create an organization that becomes predictable. Predictability creates efficiency, and that efficiency creates capacity. One of the most common signs of a growing business is that everything feels urgent. So, you definitely want to make sure that you are creating some level of predictability in your business. Now, let's talk about the fourth issue, the escalation path. One of the most common signs as a side of a growing business is that everything starts to feel urgent and every issue becomes a leadership issue. Every decision becomes an owner decision and every problem becomes meeting. So eventually, leadership gets buried in all the little detail of the business. What you want to do as a strong manufacturer is solve this by creating escalation paths. You want to define what can be solved at the operator level, what belongs with supervisors, and what belongs with managers. What truly requires executive attention? Not every problem deserves the owner's attention. That's an important lesson because if leadership is constantly solving operational issues, they're no longer leading, they're firefighting, and firefighting does not scale. Now, let's move to the fifth item, your operating breathing. This may be the most important system of all. because you want to make sure that your business runs on a rhythm. As a great manufacturer, don't manage by event, manage by rhythm. Every week, you want to make sure that you're reviewing what shipped, what didn't, what inventory increased, what customer issues emerged, and what cash came in. What cash is expected next week. You want to create a predictable cadence for review, not because we love meetings, but because creating rhythm creates alignment. And when you have alignment, you reduce the level of surprises that you get in your business. One of the biggest differences I see between a struggling manufacturer and a high performing manufacturer, it's not about intelligence because you are incredibly intelligent to build your business, to have built your business to this level. It's about creating consistency. The best companies review, adjust, and execute relentlessly. They don't wait for problems to become crises. They create that rhythm within the business and they follow that rhythm daily, weekly, and month to month. So, what you want to make sure is you want to build your first systems roadmap. If you're listening and thinking, where do I start with building that system roadmap? I always say start small. We don't want to boil over the ocean. So pick one area where your business feels dependent on memory. Document the process and clarify ownership. Create visibility and review it weekly. That's it. Don't try to systemize everything at once. Strong systems are built gradually, and the goal is not perfection. The goal is reducing the dependency on heroics. So you want to make sure every process is standardized and every ownership gap has a clarified person, an owner. Every visibility issue you solve makes the business more scalable. Starting small and then creating that roadmap for that specific area of business allows you to one, experience the idea of creating that system roadmap, as well as not overwhelming yourself as a business owner. One of the biggest misconceptions about growth is that the bigger the business, naturally stronger the business becomes. And that is not necessarily true. A bigger business does not automatically become stronger. What happens is that growth exposes everything that is not scalable. The communication gaps become more visible and decision bottlenecks become more painful. You have a lot of informal processes that become harder to manage. And eventually, the business reaches a point where effort alone is no longer enough. That's the moment that many manufacturing leaders find themselves working harder than ever and yet feeling less in control than they did years earlier. So it's not because they've lost the capability, it's just because the business has reached a level of complexity that requires a different operating system. And that's really what systems and processes are. They're not about bureaucracy and they're not about paperwork. They're not rules just for the sake of rules. They're simply the way a business captures what works and makes it repeatable. Because if success depends on one person remembering something, then that's not a system, it's a risk. And if a process only works when a specific employee is present, that's not scalable. It's dependency. The strongest manufacturers understand that systems don't replace great people, they amplify them. They free talented people from solving the same problems repeatedly so that they can focus on improving and growing the business. So, before we wrap up, I'd encourage you to ask yourself one question. What part of my business would struggle the most if my most experienced employee did not show up tomorrow? Don't start by looking at that person. Look at the process behind them, because that's usually where your next opportunity to scale is hiding. And that's the deeper lesson from today's conversation. The goal is not to build a business that depends on extraordinary effort. The goal is to build a business that performs consistently, predictably, and profitably, even as it grows. In our next episode, we're going to talk about one of the most powerful tools leaders have for making better decisions. We will continue the conversation about visibility because the business that scales successfully are not the ones that avoid problems. They're the ones that see them early enough to do something about them. And when visibility improves, decision making improves. When decision making improves, performance follows. I will see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks for spending time in the Manufacturing Money Room. If this episode gave you something to think about, let us know. drop Tolani a voice note or leave a comment or a review. And hey, if you like what you heard, share it with your friends. If you didn't like what you heard, share it with your enemies. You'll find the links in the show notes to connect with Tolani, and if you want to watch the episode on YouTube, that's there as well. Join us next time in the Manufacturing Money Room, where it's all about better numbers, better decisions, better manufacturing.